We were convinced that we were going there to rescue live people. From Jersey, we could see the World Trade Center site across the water. It was at least 100 times worse than I could ever imagine that it was going to be.
Really, I don't think anybody was really prepared.
When they say complete devastation, it was. It looked like a world war.
My connection with the Twin Towers was my family went on summer vacation there in July of 2001. And when the incident took place, my whole family had a real direct connection with the tower, you know, just being there 2 months previous.
Here we are on top of the world. Here, a helicopter. The helicopter's below us.
My kids were touched by it more so because they were just there. And, you know, they were asking questions about, you know, the people that were there, that they met up there, the tour people. What I told them was that it happened so early in the morning that the observation deck, I don't believe, opened up till 10, so I don't think they were up there yet.
What's that one and the blue one?
I don't know.
Is that thing with the green stuff on top the Empire State Building?
As I looked up, I just saw another person come down and another one, and I wound up standing there for a short amount of time watching numerous people, you know, plummet to their deaths. And actually, I was in such shock, I stopped moving just to watch this. And after just a few steps, I heard what I thought was a thunder type sound, and looked back and I saw the building start to come down. But at first, I just thought it was the top of the building. Then I realized that the whole building was collapsing, and I basically just ran for my life, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was like the end of the world. There had to have been hundreds of firefighters in that building, and I was just hoping that there was some possibility that the majority of them could survive. All you heard were the pass alarm devices going off from all the guys who were down. Fires were raging all over, cars were exploding. We honestly thought we were under attack.
I knew that there was a lot of firefighters that were going to be trapped and that were going to be affected by it.
I immediately started getting phone calls from family members who knew that I'm part of the USAR team.
Casualty reports, another bullet. Civilian casualties are anticipated to be high.
We were activated to mobilize down at Homestead Air Force Base, and we were going to try and get air transport.
At Homestead Air Force Base, we were ready to get on an aircraft within 6 hours of the collapse.
We figured that any hour that we were spending here in Miami, we were wasting.
There was firefighters from all across the country, all across the world, that wanted to come up and help, because not only were there trapped people, but there's trapped firefighters, and that's our family.
I asked them when we were on the way here, I said, have you guys been told anything?
I personally was scheduled to get married. I called my fiance, and told her that, you know, I could probably get clearance to be released from the incident, but I need to go.
Let me tell you what's been happening with this team. Because of the number of resources that were immediately dispatched, and at the same time, the tremendous number of resources that responded to that incident without being dispatched, New York City was overwhelmed. On top of that, New York City lost a tremendous amount of resources and expertise when they lost, this is Washington, when they lost Ray Downey and a lot of the command staff from the Urban Search and Rescue Program. They have had a difficult time recovering from that. Within the last almost 75 minutes now, 5 New York firefighters were recovered from a collapsed or from a smashed SUV. 2 of those 5 were able to walk away from that. The other 3 are at the hospital, but everybody is doing well. We also but there are people alive in those buildings, and the recovery operations and search and rescue operations are continuing.
We finally made a decision that we weren't going to wait for a plane. We were just going to, we wanted to get there.
The morning that we left to drive to New Jersey, there was a tropical storm coming across the peninsula of Florida. So we were in a predicament that do we drive through a tropical storm, or do we stay in Florida, maybe that our assets would be needed if this tropical storm intensifies, or drive through the storm and continue this mission? Well, we decided to drive through the storm.
It seemed like an eternity just to get from one state to the next. You know, we wanted to get there.
And the drive going up to New York City was difficult because then I was out of touch with any type of news or phone to be able to keep track of who had survived out of members of the department that I know.
From Jersey, we could see the World Trade Center site across the water, and we knew we were still many hours, if not more than a day, from really starting operations. But we could see the rubble pile and the World Trade Center site from across the water. Even though we were tired and we didn't have much sleep, and we had been cramped into a bus for so long of a ride, we were prepared, and we were just emotionally preparing ourselves to begin work.
And they had started to list some of the names on the newspaper of people that were suspected as being missing. It was difficult just to start to see those names in print.
And then we arrived at McGuire's Air Force Base, which is adjacent to Fort Dix.
This bulletin just in. Thank you. All the military bases are currently on Charlie alert. This is a very heightened state of alert. Wartime conditions. There is no higher level of no nonsense, no bullshit seriousness than you are facing right now.
There are toxic chemicals on site identified, flammables on site, carcinogens on site, oxygen deficient atmospheres, oxygen enriched atmospheres, radiation, and biohazards. Have I missed any?
So my job as a safety officer was to assess this site, looking at safety and how we could operate safe. And I really, at that time, I think I wondered why I was going to be a safety officer. I mean, what could I do as a safety officer at a site like this?
We are tasked with rotating through for the first team that arrived on site, and that's the team from Massachusetts. They've been there a long time. They had never been activated before. This was the world's worst situation for a team that had no experience to roll into. They have done an admirable job, but it's time for them to move on, and it's time for us to move in.
The big anticipation was that we were convinced that we were going there to rescue live people. Because of the huge amount of area, we figured that there was a big potential to go out there and save lives. We were sent to the Javits Center, which is a convention center, and our main boo, our main base of operations was at the Javits Center, and our forward base of operations was actually at Ground Zero.
The first time we drove, that my squad drove to the World Trade Center from Javits, was in the middle of the night.
It was at least 100 times worse than I could ever imagine that it was going to be.
I don't think anybody was really prepared, even with all the briefings and everything that we got. When we went up there and first sight of that Ground Zero, it was just, you know, I don't think anybody could be prepared for that.
When we saw it in person, that close, walking through rubble, and not being able to see across the rubble pile, so many buildings down, it wasn't just those two towers, but virtually the entire World Trade Center complex, all 7 buildings or so were laying down.
I was trying to remember seeing the buildings when they were up, and obviously when the buildings were up, it just, you know, covered a lot of the area, but now with the buildings gone, it was such a vast openness of nothing there.
I felt there's so much to do here. I know we don't have enough personnel.
When they say complete devastation, it was. It looked like a world war. It was almost surreal.
The mission there was to search and rescue of trapped and missing persons. We knew that there was at least 300 firefighters that were trapped and missing. So one of our main objectives was to get our brother firefighters out of there. And FDNY mission was the same. You know, we knew we were after anybody that was trapped or missing, but we knew there was firefighters in there.
Our forward boo, or forward base of operations as we would call it, was set up right next to one of the New York bases of operation.
It was really an experience for us because they were overwhelmed, and it was very hard to get inside that circle when we got there, and rightfully so because of the enormity of the project.
One of the teams that we operated with was a portion of the New York City team that was one of the better teams in the country, and what happened was most of their team responded to this incident early on and the fire. So New York lost just about their whole urban search and rescue team in the initial collapse. So the few members that were left from their team were operating with the equipment that they had there. One of the best teams in the country was now a fragment looking for the rest of their members that most of the other teams in the country had been to training that was taught by these New York City firefighters. They mostly developed the whole USAR concept. They were on the ground floor of developing the teams that we were actually on now going up there responding on. So we had a great respect for FDNY going up there. And it was a difficult situation initially working alongside them because FDNY is traditionally one of the best fire departments in the world, and they know it and we knew it.
At first, I think that the New York firefighters didn't really know who we were.
We weren't wearing firefighter uniforms. We were wearing our search and rescue team uniforms.
They have never asked for any other department's help in their history. They have a long history of handling anything that happens within the city of New York. FDNY can handle.
It's their department, it's their co-workers, their friends, their firefighters, and I think I can understand where they wanted to be solely involved in it. After a few days to maybe the first week, I think they started realizing that there was no way they could do this on their own.
We went in there a little cautiously around the New York firefighters, and as we were setting up our base camp, and some of them started coming over and helping us a little bit, and they helped us set our tent up. They didn't say a whole lot. There was a lot of low heads there, but they had a job to do, and we had a job to do.
The first thing we did with their command post, they were literally using pieces of broken office furniture and makeshift stands, and they were trying to put blueprints and disaster plans on broken furniture.
Well, the first assignment that the New York fire chief gave us was to make him a table to put his plans on, and we made them the most magnificent table they'd ever seen to put their plans on. and walked it over, and we put it in their tent. They didn't say a lot, but later on, after talking with them in the later days, that went a long way to show them that we were there to do whatever it took, and we were there to do whatever they needed us to do.
The guard was dropped and we were talking the same language. We were talking as brother firefighters and not as an urban search and rescue team talking to a New York firefighter.
And they started finding out that we were firefighters. They changed their personality, and it was more like we were starting to have a little family between them. They would come over to us and talk, and during our breaks, they'd come over and have coffee with us, and we would meet them for lunch, which typically was at 3 or 4 in the morning.
At the meal times, I'd sit next to a firefighter from New York and just start, talking, introducing myself, and before I knew it, they were just almost like, letting it all out. And I think that once they sat together, they tried to clam up a little bit.
We got into a void that opened up into a huge underground mall area. And the mall area was mostly collapsed. And around the corner of the mall area comes a M16 with a flashlight attached to us and instructed us to halt where we were and identify ourselves. A small National Guard group held us at gunpoint until we could identify ourselves. And then even after identifying ourselves, they instructed us to come with them, that they were going to escort us out of the site.
They would give us a mission, if you will, for a couple hours at a time.
All right, here's what's going on. The search crew found an elevator shaft under building 4. What we're going to be doing is we're going to rappel down the shaft. Okay. I'm sending squad 3 in there. And, hopefully we can find something.
But you know what, make sure with Jack that he's safe. If it's that building right there, he doesn't have a problem. Just make sure.
Yeah, Jack's going with her. That's right here. This is collapsed. Right. So it's right in here like this. All right? Just to let you know, this building is gone. So
Jack Curtis is taking a look at the stability, and we're getting squads ready with equipment, so when he gives us the green light, we're going to go ahead and start sending him in.
Just go. Just make it happen. He knows. There's 5 of you going, all right? 1, 2, 3.
I need to get something.
Okay, 4 of them. Jack, okay.
We crawled out into the middle of, almost smack in the middle of the ground zero. And you feel like an ant out there. You just, you climb up one hill, you go down one hole, and all of a sudden you look all around you, and you're just surrounded by a massive rubble pile.
We're working on a prospective spot now that hopefully will lead us to some more work.
My position is as a rescue specialist and a technical search specialist.
The rescue specialists are the ones that actually go in there and do the cutting and the moving of the debris and the rocks and all that to try to locate the victims.
Some of us use knee pads. We spend a lot of time down on the ground digging.
We're the ones that kind of go in after the reconnaissance has spotted an area that there might be possible victims in.
We train when entering voids and collapsed areas to always shore or provide support with either wood or metal struts, and it's used to prevent further collapse.
Collapse hazard was probably the biggest concern of everybody there. Was once you went underneath this pile of twisted steel and rubble, how stable was it going to be, and was it going to come down on us?
Those buildings all around it, I'm sure, were occupied at the time of collapse, absolutely. Right?
As a structural engineer, basically what we do is when we arrive at a site where there's been a building collapse and where there's people trapped, we one of the first ones to go in and determine if the area is relatively safe for the rescuers to enter. There's another one that you've been hearing on TV that they say is leaning and all that, and that's just an optical illusion. It's not. It's actually it's over here. It's a Merrill Lynch building, and it's just the way the sides of the buildings are. It's got spires, and when twilight hits, it looks like it's leaning. But it's an optical illusion.
We were working some caverns, some void spaces, doing some crawling, digging out some areas that we thought potentially would lead us somewhere, doing a lot of cutting of metal. We're working on a prospective spot now that hopefully will lead us to some more work.
Unfortunately, there was so much area to cover here. Nobody had even a fraction of the shoring that would have been necessary to shore these areas up, and we just didn't have a lot of time. It would have been almost impossible really to work in a safe manner in these areas.
We were sent out to tunnel into some areas that the dogs had been in, and they thought, you know, there might be a possibility the dogs had alerted in that area.
It was kind of pointless to send a dog out there when there's big pieces of steel that would just kind of loom out, and they could potentially fall off of it into a pit. My dog was very depressed. My dog is alive, searches for live people, and he knew, but my dog is immediately changed his demeanor. He got more and more depressed as every day went by, to the point where even people who weren't dog people were saying, "What's the matter with your dog? Is he okay? Do we need to take him somewhere and play with him?"
When we initially started to tunnel and go into some of these voids, it was a bit intimidating because you were really going into nowhere's land. No one had an idea of really where anything was based on the devastation. I can remember one of the most unusual nights that we had there. It was about our third night in, and we were getting ready to go tunnel in. We were going in about 30 feet, and as we were down about 10 feet, I'll never forget, I heard the first airplane fly over. And after I heard it, several other people heard it as well, and we all just kind of stopped for a minute, looked around, and then went right back to work. But I can remember that initial eeriness. It wasn't really fear, but it was just the eeriness of hearing a plane and knowing that we're in an area where you could still smell jet fuel. You could see parts of the fuselage where the FBI had retrieved some of the aircraft.
There was definitely a sense of maze work, crawling through the debris. Some points we'd come to what seemed like the voids wouldn't go any further, sort of like a dead end, and we'd start digging again, and then we'd find another void. It was like sometimes chains of tunnels and voids, but we would find stairwells that were not completely collapsed, and then we found the voids that were not man-made. They weren't rooms. They just happened as the rubble was falling down. You'd find large room-like areas of just rubble that did not completely collapse. A lot of times we couldn't see where we were going. We had to feel our way around. Sometimes you were digging and it was so cramped and so tight, the lamp on your helmet, you couldn't shine exactly where you were going, and that was a little confusing sometimes working in the dark.
What they're doing is they're on top of the pit right now, and they're trying to work their way down towards the bottom.
So this squad that we were watching was under the pile searching a void. And we didn't know how deep they went in, but after about 10 minutes, we didn't hear anything from them. I kept calling on the radio for them to call back to me. And nowhere on that site had I ever lost radio contact with a team before. Well, this one disappeared in the hole of twisted steel underground, and there was no radio contact with the whole squad. So at that time, I thought that we might have lost this squad underneath the pile. So we started to call for another squad to come and do a search. And at that time, they came back into radio contact, and they were somehow They had gone about 6 levels below the pile, and for that reason, they were out of radio contact. The steel workers were working right alongside of us, actually cleaning the site up, cutting the steel and pulling the steel out of there at the same time that we were working underneath the pile. A lot of my time was just involved in watching the cranes and the steel workers swinging the steel overhead, and a couple times the steel workers had steel fall from the cranes, and luckily there was nobody operating under them.
Those crane operators were many times working in the blind, is what they referred to. They couldn't see actually what was being picked up. In the event that we have a difficult or very heavy or an unusual piece that has to be removed from the pile, it's my job to, along with the structural engineer, it's my job to come up with a way to rig it, literally rig it, so we can remove it with a crane. We'll hook on certain pieces of steel, we'll remove them. It's like a pile of pickup sticks. As you remove 1 or 2 pieces of steel, you may be creating voids that people are trapped. And that's why it was, the whole time we were there, every time we made a pick, every time we took something out of that pile, we would just pray that we would uncover somebody that was alive and we could take out.
A lot of steel work. The steel is a problem. Unfortunately, that's all that's out there now is steel. And from a rescue perspective, it's not the best. We love to see concrete. We train for concrete, and that's because statistically, that's where you're going to find a live victim, is in between slabs of concrete. Slabs of concrete protects a person from falling debris.
We're helping FDNY clear some areas, some debris, so they can put it into the box and crate it away with the cranes. It's piece by piece by piece.
Many times we had New York firefighters digging next to us. They would tell us, yeah, we're expecting to find the crew of Rescue Company 2 or you know, certain companies. They knew that they weren't in certain areas, and they had already found a member or 2. So they knew in certain areas there was likely to be firefighters. So as we were, I remember one time we were looking through an area that had suspected for having a member of Rescue Company 2. And alongside of us was some firefighters on Rescue 2, which weren't involved in, were not dispatched immediately, were not on shift when the World Trade Center incident happened. I remember one of the firefighters was actually responding and was there when it collapsed, and he was looking for his co-workers, his fellow brothers in this company that unfortunately did not make it out.
One of my worst experiences in New York was in talking to the individual firefighters. They wouldn't mention, you know, I knew this guy or that guy. They would go down a list. They all knew 20, 30, or 40 firefighters. Even though the department is as large as it is, firefighters are very close, and so they make, you know, strong friendships, strong bonds. And we ended up talking and basically, you know, giving them an opportunity to vent, because I think a lot of them were in denial and just doing their job, you know, at the site, and not really taking a moment to step back and be able to accept their great loss. And so when we were taking our breaks and our dinner breaks and things like that, I made it a point to try to sit with some of the New York firefighters and not with our own team members, because I felt that they would feel more comfortable talking to somebody that wasn't close to them. And it ended up that I ended up having some really good conversations, and I feel that that was a really big part of the beginning of a healing for them. They were really, some of them, you know, we'd break down and cry together as he would explain to me what the last time he saw a friend, or a note that a friend left behind, a firefighter.
You know, I saw guys there that were working, and one of them told me he lost 70 friends in there. And I tried to put that in perspective, how you can know 70 people and they all died all at one time. And he was there working day to day, doing his job, because he had to do it.
We found a trapped Port Authority police officer who was killed.
So our mission was to go out there and see if we could assist the Port Authority police officers with removing the Port Authority officer that was trapped.
We were told the conditions were pretty bad, almost unbearable, and they wanted us to know if we could work in there, because they didn't think it was going to be possible.
The area was a very unstable area. It was deemed unsafe very early on in the incident.
His lieutenant with the Port Authority, Lieutenant Keegan, I'll never forget his name, asked us to please, get him out. And when we were down there and doing a reconnaissance, there was a point that we thought we may have to dismember the police officer to get him out.
It was deemed that it was unsafe to remove any steel in that area. Our engineers took a look at it and decided that we shouldn't move anything.
I can remember reporting to the police officer at the time that if we do, we're going to bring all of them out. We're not going to leave anything behind. And you would think that that was the best news he ever heard, that we were going to completely bring out one of his officers and to help the family with closure and his unit with closure.
Immediately as we started to get close and climb down through this cave-like void, I started to notice how hot it was. I could tell that it was definitely burning nearby because it was pretty hot, and it was a little smoky, and it was definitely dark. So we're feeling our way around, and we were starting to get further into this void, and the heat was starting to build, and I was really starting to get a little worried about what we were climbing into. I hadn't been into this area yet.
Our doctor and our team members got down there, and by removing the police officer's equipment was able to remove the body intact.
It was pinned to an extent, so we knew we were going to be in there for a while.
And then I can remember as we progressed into the rescue operation, we were able to free some of the debris around them and bring them out whole. We didn't have to do any cuts or anything. And I can remember, I get goosebumps when I think about it, reporting that to Lieutenant Keegan that, hey, we didn't have to make any cuts and we're bringing them out. And the hug he gave me, it was a hug that you've never felt before. And it meant so much to him and his people that we didn't have to, take apart one of his officers.
That gained so much respect from the New York City police officers and firefighters that we did what they had determined earlier to be impossible. We had got their brother out intact, and so he could, the family could have some closure to that incident.
At first we thought that they wouldn't want us to do much, and they would want us to stand back once we got him close to them, that they would want to just take care of the situation. But then they informed us that we had been there to help, and we had been able to pull him out, so they wanted us to be part of it, and it was okay for us to stay. That
meant the world to those guys.
Oh, it made the whole team feel like we accomplished at least something. We went there as search and rescue to rescue live victims. We didn't rescue, we did the next best thing, is that we allowed these families to have closure.
There was a tremendous sense of relief, if you will, because we knew what it meant to the families that were waiting.
And Marky, I think what we're going to need to do, that I would like to see done, is there's water below that level, is to get some shoring in there and build a platform at that floor level we're going to breach.
We were crawling around in one of the holes, and one of our members found an arm that was caught between two very large steel beams. We tunneled around, and we got around into the back, and from what it appeared, that somehow the two beams had collided together and caught the person in between, and the only thing that was really left was just the arm that was sticking out of the two beams. And We notified the fire department, the New York Fire Department, of our findings and to find out what they wanted us to do. There was no way to move the beams. There was just, it was buried too deep below the whole pile to to get any cranes down there or anything. So we just went ahead and had to cut off the arm, and the hand was still holding a set of keys. And my thinking was this poor person was running with the keys in his hand, ready to leave the office or get into the car to leave, and then the building went and they never made it. And here, this was where they ended up, caught between these two beams.
We knew that we would come across a firefighter, so that was always on your mind. A firefighter is always has more of an emotional bond to you, even if you don't know him, because that could easily have been me in the World Trade Center. It could have been a building in Miami that fell, and it just happened to be in New York. But we were of the same occupation, almost the same blood, and it was difficult knowing that we were going to be coming across them. And when we started to find equipment, pieces of uniform and that sort of thing, that's when it first started to dawn on me that I personally was going to be coming across deceased firefighters.
We had come across some cables that were near an elevator hoistway, so we figured we were close to stairwells, and we started to see some of the steel steps, even though they were flattened out. And in that area, we just kept searching and moving around. We had finally come across, by digging a little bit, a FDNY member's fire protective clothing. And when we realized that it was a firefighter that was buried in the rubble, because their reflective stripes were visible once we started digging out from their boots.
It was almost like finding a family member.
When we found the remains of the firefighters and the police officers, and when we were taking them out, it was difficult standing there thinking these guys could be you, and what they went through.
The way it went was, if we had the recovery or if somebody was to find a member, you would try to identify where that member was from. And at that point, that member's company, his fire company, his brothers, would come and they would recover him. They would be the ones that actually placed him in a Stokes basket. They were the ones that actually placed the flag over him, and they were the ones that carried him out of the pile. On one particular occasion, we were pretty deep in the hole, and we had a recovery. We found somebody. We worked for many hours trying to make this recovery, and we were working at that time hand in hand with some of the members of Rescue 2. Well, when this member was finally recovered and he was placed in the Stokes basket, normally the USAR teams would try to remove themselves and give the New York City Fire Department members the peace and the space they needed to take out their brother. We had been in this hole for a number of hours, and when I mentioned the fact that we were going to pull out, one of the Rescue 2 members, it's probably one of the best, what an experience, something I'll never forget. And that man put his hand on me and told me, he said, "No, you guys, you're not going anywhere. We were in this together. We're all brothers here now." And it was, as horrible as that may sound, it was such an honor to be not necessarily accepted by them, but to be a part of their recovering their brother.
And we would give the signal and everything would stop, including all the noise and everything.
The call was made that they were going to remove a brother firefighter's body.
And if they were able to have any of that person's unit or crew available, they would be waiting to help assist with the Stokes basket to put him inside the rescue truck.
It was coordinated so that everybody would stop all work, and automatically everybody would just start coming over to the area where a firefighter was going to be removed. And workers, construction workers, rescue workers, firefighters, civilians, everybody just lined up and made a pathway toward the rescue truck.
The entire operation was given a signal to stop what they were doing, and you could literally hear a pin drop out of all the cranes and the steel workers and rescue workers. Everything came to a complete standstill, and then there would be like a gauntlet of police officers and firefighters at full attention to receive our fallen brother.
And everybody would just sit there and salute as he would go by. And I think you would look at everybody. There wasn't a dry eye in the line. Everybody was overcome with emotion.
But everybody really had a few moments to gather their thoughts.
You wonder, who's waiting for him to come home? Is his crew back at the station, saying, hey, we're going to get his name, I know he's okay. What was he supposed to do the next morning when he got off shift? Did he have a baseball game with his son? It makes you then do a little self-assessment and saying, why do we do what we do? Why am I doing this? Is this going to be me next time? Am I not going to go see my son or be able to go back to the station with the guys?
If you didn't feel it in your heart, you don't have a soul.
Of course it affects you because you lose somebody that you know, but it also affects you deeply because it's a brother firefighter, and I guess when push comes to shove, you start thinking, hey, that could have been me in there.
Both the police department and the fire department, the steel workers, everybody that was around it, the dignity and respect was overwhelming.
As the FDNY members were brought in and they continued the extrication, we were told that led to a pocket of other firefighters that were also found there, as well as some police officers. And that really affected me. After that, we went back that night, and I don't think I slept that night at all.
In the final analysis of what we did, it seems like it was a job that was left unfinished. The fire service, when you go on a fire, you're there until the last bit of fire is out, and you know it's not going to come back and the job is done. Here it seemed like the job was not done. There was still burning coming out of the pit, smoke, and there were still bodies in there. There were still brother firefighters and police officers in there.
One of the saddest moments for me was when they brought some of the family members up close to ground zero and had let them get up close to be able to take a look at what the rubble site looked like. And I happened to be in the immediate area where they were brought up past the barricades, and they were brought by a contingent of FDNY members that were providing support for the family members. They brought them up close, and they were, for the first time, to see their eyes. I was standing right next to them, glancing at the destruction that we had been working around for several days, and realizing that they all had lost someone in that building, and looking at that site and how devastating it was, and to see it in their eyes, they all immediately were crying. I couldn't hold back tears. I started crying myself, just watching the grief on their faces and knowing many of them were wives and children of firefighters that were lost.
It seems like sometimes disasters like this bring out the best in people. And it brought out the best in a lot of people from what I could see over there. There's a lot of help from civilian people that were over there, just coming around to help us out, try to support us, give us food, water, whatever. Was really encouraged by, there was always a group as we were being bussed into the site that was outside of the zone where people weren't allowed, cheering us on, waving, holding up signs. And I was moved, and it was very positive. It really gave us a burst of adrenaline to see that, because here people just coming out of, leaving their homes, and there were a couple nights it was raining, and they were out there doing the same thing and showing their appreciation for us. And we weren't there for the appreciation. We were there to do a job, but it felt good anyways.
I would say probably the most moving thing was seeing the New York firefighters, their pride in their brothers, the way that they would go on in their work, And every day there'd be hundreds and hundreds of firefighters there to dig through the rubble and to do the work that had to be done. And I knew even after our team would leave that they would spend months, if not a year, continuing this work.
From the beginning I had respect for them, but after getting there and meeting them and working with them, I have a tremendous amount of respect for them. They were extremely professional. They had a tremendous amount of courage. A lot of the guys that I met there just had no fear of doing the job. They had a tremendous bond with each other also. They called each other brother for everything, and they all got along well. They kind of took us in, and they didn't have to, and they treated us like one of their brothers.
One of the most disturbing things that I encountered when I was up there was our second night on the pile. As a medical specialist, you tend to be more cognizant of people's overall appearance. It can show signs of shock or dehydration or difficulty breathing, and you just become trained after a while of doing this for so many years. And I can remember looking over and seeing a New York City firefighter, he was a captain, he was in the same area the second night in a row. And I kind of looked at him, and he was kind of unshaven and looked a bit ashen and had that 1,000-yard stare. And I remember going up to him, and in the fire service we use the word brother a lot. You know, it's just a word that we use amongst firefighters. And I said, "Hey brother, are you okay?" And he kind of just stared at me and didn't really give me an answer. So I went up to him again and gave him a rub on his arm, and I said, hey brother, are you okay? I said, when was the last time you had something to drink? And he didn't even blink. He just looked at me and he says, "I'm looking for my boys." And I said, "Well, what company are they with? You know, and maybe I can go back to the command post, we can get you some help." He says, "They're both my sons." And they were both New York City firefighters that were killed, and he was looking for his sons. And I didn't know if anybody knew where he was at. So I said, "Hey, let's go back to the command post, and we'll get, we're going to get you checked out, and we'll make sure everything's okay." And I was able to get him to go back to the New York City Fire Command Post. And as I was walking up, I can remember some of the battalion chiefs there saying, "Oh my God," and I can't remember the guy's name, but they said, "You're here. We thought you were missing. We thought you were missing." And they were so happy to see him, because he had been wandering around the pile for probably a day and a half, and they thought maybe he was one of the missing, and he was looking for his two sons that were killed. That really put things in perspective. That's when you knew you were at the real thing. It blew my mind. I mean, here's a guy not only performing his job, but part of that job is looking for his sons that are missing and probably dead. You know, and he didn't abandon his post. He continued to do his job, and I thought, man, that's a firefighter.
The most difficult part of the whole experience was just looking at everybody and seeing the pain that they had. I think that our team felt pretty fortunate that we were at least called out. We were able to go out there and give a hand. There was a lot of people that were sitting, and they had literally set up a fence. They were sitting outside the fence, where you could see their hurt and their pain and couldn't do anything about it.
When we got activated, we really thought we were going to go up and find live victims. I remember talking to my fiance and telling her that, "Honey, I've got to go." And she says, "I know you do." And the reason why was because we really thought we were going to have some live victims. And I think in all of our hearts, we were hoping that some of those victims were going to be firefighters.
The most difficult part of the whole mission was leaving my family behind and knowing that the families that were back here were worried not only about us, but worried about the country in general.
The most difficult part of the experience was dealing with the large-scale death of so many humans. They were all people that had lives, had families, and even though we would try to separate ourselves from that emotional aspect of our work, sometimes you just couldn't avoid it.
Without a doubt, the most difficult was to see a firefighter dead and to be the one putting that firefighter in a body bag and removing him from the scene. That was, without a doubt, the hardest thing. There was probably 5 million other hard things, but that would be the hardest thing, was seeing, fallen police officers and firefighters. There's a lot of people that were killed, and we're sympathetic to all those people and all those families that lost people and the businesses and so on. But on a personal level, that was my family. That is our extended brotherhood, and I feel like firefighters across this country, I lost a family member as well.